My husband told me he was going on a business trip to Texas, but actually went to Vegas and married his high school sweetheart. Now he's demanding half of my inheritance in the divorce. My husband James and I had been married for 12 years. We met in our late 20s through a mutual friend at a charity gala. I was immediately drawn to his charismatic personality and the way he could light up any room. He was different from the other guys I'd dated, more mature, focused, and seemingly genuine. We dated for 2 years before getting married in what I thought was a fairy tale wedding. We built a life together, bought our dream house in the suburbs, and I genuinely thought we were happy. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but nothing major. At least, that's what I thought until 3 weeks ago. It started with a routine business trip. James works in software sales, and these trips were pretty common. He told me he was heading to Austin for a week-long conference. Kissed me goodbye, wheeled his suitcase out the door, and that was that. I even dropped him off at the airport, stopping at his favorite coffee shop to get him his usual vanilla latte for the road. He told me how thoughtful I was, how lucky he was to have me. Now I realize he was probably just laying it on thick to compensate for his guilt. The first red flag should have been when he was oddly unreachable during the trip. Usually, he'd FaceTime me from his hotel room or at least text regularly. We had a routine, he'd call before bed, and we'd chat about our days. This time, his responses were sparse and always through text. When I asked about FaceTime, he'd claim he was too tired or the internet was bad. Once, he even said the hotel was doing maintenance on their Wi-Fi system. I actually called the hotel to check. Guess what? No maintenance scheduled. Then came the Instagram post that destroyed my world. One of my college friends, Melissa, who lives in Las Vegas, posted a story of her dinner at some fancy restaurant on the Strip. And there, in the background of her photo, was my husband. With a woman. Looking very intimate. They were sharing what appeared to be a chocolate souffle, and he was feeding her with his fork. The same way he used to feed me dessert when we were dating. I immediately called Melissa. She hadn't even noticed him in the background when she posted it. But being the amazing friend she is, she went back to the restaurant and did some detective work. That's when things got even worse. Not only was James in Vegas instead of Austin, but he was there with Sarah, his high school girlfriend. And here's the kicker, they had gotten married. In Vegas. While still married to me. Melissa managed to find this out because they were celebrating at the restaurant, being very open about their spontaneous wedding. The waitstaff remembered them because James had arranged for "just married" to be written in chocolate on their dessert plate. I confronted James via text with the photo. His response? "I guess now you know. I was going to tell you when I got back." As if that somehow made it better. As if planning to tell someone you committed bigamy after the fact was somehow considerate. When he returned home, he acted like this was all perfectly normal. He sat at our kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd stayed up late planning our future, where he'd comforted me when my grandmother passed away, and told me he'd reconnected with Sarah on Facebook 6 months ago. Apparently, they'd been having an emotional affair, his words, for months. He claimed he'd realized she was his true soulmate and that what we had wasn't real love. I laughed in his face. I actually laughed. Because what else do you do when your husband of 12 years tells you he's committed bigamy with his high school girlfriend and tries to pass it off as some grand romance? He had the audacity to look offended by my reaction, as if I was the one being unreasonable. But here's where it gets even better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. 3 months ago, my grandmother passed away and left me a substantial inheritance. We're talking about enough money to change my life. I'd only received it 2 weeks before his business trip. The timing, as my lawyer later pointed out, was suspicious to say the least. Now James is demanding half of my inheritance in the divorce. His lawyer, yes, he already had one lined up, is arguing that since the inheritance was received during our marriage, it's marital property. This is despite the fact that he literally committed bigamy and fraud. The absolute gall of this man continues to astound me. The irony? My grandmother never liked James. She was a sharp woman who'd built her own business from scratch and had an uncanny ability to read people. She used to tell me he reminded her of a used car salesman, slick on the surface but untrustworthy underneath. During her final days, she made me promise to keep her inheritance money in a separate account. Just in case, she'd said with a knowing look. I should have listened to her sooner. I've hired the best divorce attorney I could find, a woman named Catherine who's known in our city as the Shark. She's confident that his bigamy will work in my favor, and she's already building a case to not only protect my inheritance but possibly go after him for fraud and emotional damages. She actually giggled when I showed her the Instagram evidence and the text messages. Apparently, this is the kind of case lawyers dream about. The most surreal part? Sarah, his new wife, found out about me through Facebook. Apparently, he told her we were already divorced, and is now also filing for annulment. So not only did he commit bigamy, but he managed to destroy 2 relationships at once. Achievement unlocked, I guess? As the investigation deepened, more details emerged. My friends have been amazing through all of this. They've rallied around me, helped me document everything, and kept me sane. One friend even hired a private investigator who discovered that James and Sarah had been meeting up in various cities over the past 6 months, all during his business trips. The PI found hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and even matching flight itineraries. They had their little rendezvous down to a science, always meeting in cities where James actually had business contacts so he could write off the trips as business expenses on our taxes. The PI also uncovered something that made my blood boil. James had been siphoning money from our joint account into a secret account for months. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as time went on. He'd been planning this for a while, it seems. The real kicker? He'd been using that money to buy gifts for Sarah, including a $15,000 engagement ring. Yes, you read that right. He used our joint money to buy an engagement ring for his affair partner. The cherry on top of this Sunday of betrayal? Last night, I was going through old photos on my phone and found a picture from Valentine's Day. James had given me a beautiful necklace and written a card about how I was the only woman he'd ever truly loved. According to the PI's timeline, he was already involved with Sarah then. The necklace, as it turns out, wasn't even real gold, just like his promises. My mom keeps telling me I'll laugh about this someday. Right now, I'm alternating between rage and disbelief. How does someone wake up one day and decide to throw away 12 years of marriage for a high school fantasy? And then have the audacity to demand half of my inheritance? The divorce proceedings are going to be interesting, to say the least. My lawyer is preparing to present evidence of his bigamy, fraud, and hidden expenses from his secret meetups with Sarah. She says judges typically don't look kindly on people who commit bigamy and then try to claim their spouse's inheritance. Catherine, my lawyer, is particularly excited about the tax fraud angle. Apparently, claiming personal travel as business expenses is a big no-no. I'm staying in our house for now, my name is on the deed, and my lawyer advised me not to leave. James is staying. Well, I don't know where James is staying, and I don't care. Probably in some love nest with Sarah, planning their next wedding, which will have to wait until both divorces are final. The support from my community has been overwhelming. My colleagues at work have been incredibly understanding. My boss even offered me extra time off to deal with all the legal proceedings. My sister flew in from Seattle and has been staying with me, making sure I eat and helping me sort through the mountain of paperwork this situation has created. The weirdest part of all this? I'm actually starting to feel relieved. Yes, I'm angry and hurt, but I'm also realizing that I've been walking on eggshells for years, trying to be the perfect wife to someone who clearly didn't deserve it. Looking back, there were so many red flags I ignored, the way he'd get defensive about his phone, the sudden gym memberships that never seemed to result in any actual exercise, the mysterious work calls that had to be taken in private. My grandmother's inheritance isn't just money, it's freedom. The freedom to start over, to travel, to do all the things James always said were impractical. Maybe she knew exactly what she was doing when she left it to me. Last week, I booked my first solo vacation, something I'd always wanted to do but James had always discouraged. I'm going to Italy for 2 weeks once the initial legal proceedings are sorted out. I've started therapy to process all of this, and my therapist helped me realize something important. This isn't just about James's betrayal. It's about how I lost myself trying to be the perfect wife. I stopped painting, which I loved, because James said it was messy. I gave up my dream of starting my own business because he said it was too risky. I even stopped hanging out with certain friends because he didn't like them. Well, guess what? I've picked up my paintbrushes again. I'm taking business classes online. I've reconnected with all those friends he didn't like. Turns out he probably didn't like them because they saw right through him. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm becoming myself again. So here I am, sharing my story with strangers on the internet. If you're reading this and something feels off in your relationship, trust your gut. And maybe check your partner's location settings on their phone. Just saying. P.S. To Melissa, the friend who accidentally caught them in her Instagram story, you're getting the best Christmas present ever this year. And probably next year too. Update, 24 hours later, wow, this blew up overnight. Thank you all for the support and awards. To answer some common questions. Yes, I've kept all the evidence, including screenshots of the Instagram story and all text messages. My lawyer has copies of everything, including the PI's findings about the financial fraud. No, The Vegas marriage isn't legal since he was still married to me, but that doesn't make it any less of a betrayal. And yes, Vegas chapels are supposed to check for proof of divorce if someone says they're divorced. Guess which chapel didn't do their due diligence? My lawyer is looking into that too. Yes, I've frozen all our joint accounts and cancelled our joint credit cards, on my lawyer's advice. James actually had the nerve to text me complaining that his card was declined while trying to buy dinner. Not my problem anymore. And for those asking about Sarah, apparently, she's as shocked as I am. She reached out to me yesterday with screenshots of all their conversations where he claimed we were divorced. We're meeting for coffee next week. Never thought I'd be having coffee with my husband's other wife, but here we are. For those suggesting I go scorched earth and expose him to everyone we know, already done. I sent a mass email to our friends and family with the evidence after consulting with my lawyer. His mother's response? That sounds like James. Apparently, he pulled similar stunts in college. She then proceeded to tell me about how he'd gotten engaged to 2 different girls in the same semester. If only she'd warned me 12 years ago. The work situation is getting interesting too. Remember those business trips he was writing off on his taxes? Well, his company is now conducting an internal audit. Turns out they don't appreciate employees using the corporate card for romantic rendezvous. I've started a journal to document this whole experience. Maybe someday I'll write a book. How to Lose a Husband and Find Yourself, has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Update 2, 48 hours later, had coffee with Sarah today. Plot twist, she's actually pretty nice. We spent 3 hours sharing stories and realized James had been telling us the exact same lies, just years apart. She even got the same Valentine's Day necklace. We're both keeping our therapy appointments, but we've decided to get dinner next week. Nothing like a mutual deceiver to bring people together. The latest development? James's company finished their preliminary audit. He's been fired for misuse of company funds. His lawyer called mine asking about negotiating a settlement. Apparently, being unemployed has made him reconsider his position on my inheritance. My lawyer's response? We'll see you in court. I'm overwhelmed by all the support from this community. Your messages and comments have helped me more than you know. To everyone who shared similar stories, thank you. You've helped me feel less alone in this. And to the person who suggested I take up kickboxing as therapy, I had my first class yesterday. Turns out punching things is very therapeutic. Final thought, never underestimate a grandmother's intuition. Or the power of social media to expose cheaters. Or the importance of having a good lawyer. Or the therapeutic value of a kickboxing class. I'll update again after the first court hearing. For now, I'm focusing on myself, my art, my business classes, and planning my trip to Italy. Life goes on, and surprisingly, it's looking brighter than ever. Final update, 6 months later, the end of the Vegas wedding saga. Well, Reddit, it's been quite a journey, and I promised I'd come back with a final update once everything was settled. Grab your popcorn, because this conclusion doesn't disappoint. First, the legal stuff, the divorce is finally official. The judge was, to put it mildly, not impressed with James's attempts to claim half my inheritance. Actually, her exact words were, "Mr. James's last name, are you seriously pursuing this claim after committing bigamy?" The look on his face was priceless. Remember that company audit I mentioned? Turns out James hadn't just been writing off his rendezvous with Sarah, he'd been running quite the expense scheme for years. The company pressed charges for fraud. Between that, the bigamy charges, and the evidence of him siphoning money from our joint accounts, let's just say he didn't exactly come out of this winning. Not only did he not get any of my inheritance, but he had to pay me a pretty substantial settlement plus my legal fees. Sarah and I have, surprisingly, become good friends. We even started a support group for women who've been deceived by their partners. It meets monthly at a wine bar, because obviously, and the stories we hear make James look almost amateur in comparison. Sarah's doing great, she's dating a kindergarten teacher now who seems genuinely lovely. I was actually her reference when she applied for a new job last month. Life is funny sometimes. The house sold for way above asking price, thank you, crazy real estate market. I used part of the money to start that business I always dreamed about. It's an art therapy studio, combining my love of painting with my newfound appreciation for healing through creativity. We just hired our 3rd therapist, and we have a waiting list for sessions. Remember that Italy trip I planned? I ended up staying for a month instead of 2 weeks. Met some amazing people, ate incredible food, and may or may not have had a brief romance with a charming local olive farmer named Marco. It didn't last, but it taught me that there's definitely life after James. The kickboxing classes stuck. I'm now training for my first amateur competition. My trainer says I have surprisingly good form for someone who started by imagining their ex's face on the punching bag. The book I mentioned? It's actually happening. A publisher reached out after my story went viral. Apparently, one of you lovely Redditors shared it with the right person. It's going to be part memoir, part self-help guide for women dealing with similar situations. The working title is still How to Lose a Husband and Find Yourself, coming to bookstores next spring. As for James, last I heard, he's facing jail time for the corporate fraud charges. Sarah told me he tried to contact her recently, claiming he'd changed and wanted to make things right. She left him on read. Growth. His mother, bless her heart, still sends me birthday cards. The last one said, "I always wished you were my actual daughter instead of just my daughter-in-law. Want to keep the relationship and ditch the son? We have lunch monthly now." Grandmother's portrait hangs in my new office. Sometimes I swear she's smirking at me, like she knew all along I'd end up okay. The inheritance she left me is now being put to good use. Besides the business, I've started a scholarship fund for women leaving abusive relationships. The wildest part of all this? Last week, I got a call from that same Las Vegas chapel where James and Sarah had their wedding. Apparently, they're being sued by another woman who discovered her husband had committed bigamy there. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to be part of a class action lawsuit. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my wine. To everyone who supported me through this journey, thank you. Your comments, messages, and awards helped me more than you'll ever know. Special shout out to you /sleuthing Melissa, you know who you are, for catching them in that Instagram story. You're still getting Christmas presents for life. For those in similar situations who've been messaging me for advice, trust your gut, document everything, get a good lawyer, and remember that your grandmother was probably right about him all along. Life Update Greatest Hits. Business is thriving. New house is amazing, and exclusively in my name. Dating again, carefully, with a mandatory social media deep dive on any potential partners. Therapy was the best decision ever. Kickboxing abs are a nice bonus. Network of amazing friends, including my husband's ex-almost wife, which still makes me laugh. Book deal. Freedom to be myself. Looking back, I can finally say my mom was right. I can laugh about it now. Not because what James did wasn't terrible, but because I've realized that while he was busy chasing his high school fantasy, I was busy building a better life for myself. Oh, and that fake gold necklace he gave me for Valentine's Day? I had it melted down and turned into a small sculpture of a middle finger. It sits on my desk as a paperweight. I think that's what they call art therapy. Final thought, sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best version of ourselves. And sometimes your husband's Vegas wedding is actually your get-out-of-jail-free card.